Hello, and welcome back. Take a moment with me. I want you to think about what it feels like to struggle with the simplest things, to be unable to sit still in a meeting, to have your mind drift away in the middle of a sentence, to feel a surge of emotion you can't quite control. For many, this is the daily reality of living with ADHD. For a long time, we have understood ADHD as a genetic neurodevelopmental condition, a difference in the brain's wiring that is present from birth. We talk about it in terms of dopamine deficiencies and executive function challenges, and for many people, that is the complete story. But for an increasing number of us, there is a hidden, often overlooked chapter to this story. A chapter woven not just in our genes, but in the experiences of our early lives. This documentary is a journey into that hidden connection. It's a conversation about how childhood trauma, things like neglect, abuse, chronic stress, or growing up in an unstable home, can shape a developing brain in ways that can look and feel exactly like ADHD. This isn't a story of one thing or the other. It's a story of how these two powerful forces can intersect, creating a complex and challenging inner world. To understand this, we first have to ground ourselves in what we know about ADHD. For decades, it has been defined by three core symptoms: inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. A child with ADHD might be a daydreamer who struggles to complete their homework and loses their belongings constantly. They might be a restless whirlwind of energy who can't stay in their seat. Or they might be an impulsive child who blurts out answers in class and acts without thinking. These are the classic textbook examples of a neurodevelopmental condition that affects millions of people. And for many, the support they receive for these symptoms, from medication to behavioral therapy, is life-changing. But what if the symptoms are not purely genetic? What if the brain that struggles with focus and emotional control was shaped by its environment? This is where we introduce the crucial link: early adverse experiences. In the first few years of life, the human brain is a marvel of rapid development. It is laying down the neural pathways that will govern our stress response, our ability to regulate emotions, and our capacity for learning and focus. This is a delicate and vulnerable period. When a child grows up in an environment of toxic stress, whether from constant yelling, from a parent's substance abuse, from neglect, or from physical or emotional abuse, that stress doesn't just affect them emotionally. It physically alters their brain's architecture. The impact is most profound on two key areas. The first is the prefrontal cortex, which is the CEO of our brain. It is the part of the brain responsible for executive functions, planning, impulse control, working memory, and emotional regulation. In a healthy, stable environment, the prefrontal cortex develops a strong, efficient network of connections. But under conditions of chronic stress, this development can be impaired. The prefrontal cortex can become underdeveloped or less effective, making it incredibly difficult for a person to manage their impulses, to plan ahead, or to regulate their emotional responses. The second area affected is the brain's stress response system. In a safe environment, a child learns that a moment of stress is temporary. Their system turns on to deal with the threat, and then it turns off. But in a toxic environment, that stress response system is constantly on high alert, like a fire alarm that never stops ringing. The brain's survival instinct is paramount. The child's brain is not learning how to focus on a lesson. It's learning how to scan the room for danger. It is not learning how to sit still. It is learning how to be hypervigilant. This constant state of alert can lead to a mind that is easily distracted by everything, because for a brain trained in trauma, every single distraction could be a potential threat. This is why trauma-related symptoms are so often overlooked or misdiagnosed as ADHD. On the surface, the symptoms look almost identical. A child who can't sit still because their nervous system is in a constant state of hyperarousal looks like a child with hyperactivity. A child who can't focus on a teacher's lesson because their mind is constantly scanning for danger looks like a child with inattention. A child who has outbursts of emotion because they never learned how to regulate their nervous system looks like a child with emotional dysregulation. The behavior is the same, but the root cause is entirely different. One is a neurodevelopmental difference. The other is a protective adaptation to a hostile environment. And treating these two things with the same tools, without acknowledging the root cause of the trauma, can often be ineffective and frustrating. This is David's story. From the time he was in elementary school, David struggled. His teachers described him as a bright boy who just couldn't focus. He was constantly told to stop fidgeting, to stop daydreaming, to stop interrupting others. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, and his body always felt like it was humming with a restless energy. After countless teacher meetings and a trip to a specialist, he was diagnosed with ADHD. His parents were relieved. The diagnosis gave a name to his struggles, and the medication he was prescribed helped him focus in school. But the medication never fully addressed the deep, simmering anger he felt inside. It didn't fix the fact that he would lash out at his sister over the smallest things. It didn't quiet the feeling of deep, bone-weary exhaustion he felt every night. The diagnosis of ADHD was an important piece of the puzzle, but it was not the whole picture. David's home life was a place of deep instability. His father was frequently away, and his mother, overwhelmed and struggling, often resorted to yelling and an unpredictable temper. David's young mind learned to be constantly on guard, to scan for danger, and to cope with emotional chaos in the only way it knew how: by being restless, by being distracted, and by being impulsive. He was a survivor whose brain was wired to protect him, and his ADHD symptoms were a profound reflection of that inner struggle. But what happens when these two stories, ADHD and trauma, are woven together? What does it feel like to live with this double burden, and what does it take to begin untangling these threads? In the next part, we'll explore the deeper emotional fallout and the difficult journey of uncovering these hidden connections. Living with this combination is not simply a matter of adding one set of symptoms to another. The two conditions amplify each other, creating a unique and profound challenge. The impulsivity that is a hallmark of ADHD can become a far more volatile force when it is fueled by the emotional dysregulation that comes from trauma. The person is not just acting without thinking, they are acting out of a deep-seated, protective, and often misunderstood reaction to a perceived threat. This can manifest as an emotional rollercoaster with sudden outbursts of anger, frustration, or sadness that feel completely overwhelming and out of control. These intense emotional swings can be incredibly difficult to manage, not just for the person experiencing them, but for the people in their lives. This combination can create a constant state of internal chaos. The mind, already struggling with focus and organization due to ADHD, is now also contending with the unpredictable and often frightening memories and triggers of unresolved trauma. It's like trying to navigate a cluttered room in the dark, all while an alarm is ringing somewhere in the distance. The difficulty with executive function, the ability to plan, to organize, to follow through, is compounded by a nervous system that is on high alert, always scanning for danger. This can make simple, everyday tasks feel like a monumental struggle. Getting out of bed, paying bills, maintaining a household, all of these can become overwhelming when your mind is a battlefield between your ADHD brain and your trauma-informed nervous system. And the toll on relationships is immense. The emotional volatility, the impulsivity, and the inability to regulate emotions can lead to a constant cycle of conflict and misunderstanding. A partner might not understand why a simple disagreement can escalate into a full-blown argument, or why a small joke can trigger an intense emotional reaction. For the person with this double burden, they are often left with a feeling of being misunderstood, of being too much, or of being a bad partner. This leads to a deep sense of shame and an erosion of self-trust. They may desperately want to build and maintain healthy relationships, but their trauma-informed brain is constantly pushing them away, creating walls and defensive reactions that feel out of their control. The relationships, which should be a source of safety and comfort, often become another place where the trauma is reenacted. This is the life David was living. As an adult, he was still the bright guy who just couldn't quite get it together. His career was a series of missed opportunities, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he couldn't manage his emotional reactions in the workplace. He would lash out at a superior, after a critical comment, or quit a job in a moment of impulsive frustration. His relationships with women followed a similar pattern. He would fall in love quickly, deeply, and intensely, only to have the relationship fall apart due to his emotional outbursts. He would feel a deep, burning anger inside him that he couldn't explain. He thought it was just his ADHD, but the medication and the behavioral techniques he had learned never fully addressed this rage. It was a symptom that was far older and far deeper than he knew. David remembers one specific evening. He was in an argument with his girlfriend Sarah over a small issue. He had forgotten to take out the trash. What started as a simple frustration escalated into a full-blown conflict. Sarah, in a moment of desperation, said, "Why can't you just listen to me for once?" In that moment, a switch flipped inside David. His blood ran cold, and he felt a profound, overwhelming sense of shame and fear. He didn't just feel criticized. He felt like a child again, being yelled at for making a mistake. He didn't just hear Sarah's words. He heard the echoes of his mother's angry voice. His body, his nervous system, and his brain were all reenacting a trauma response from decades ago. He didn't have the language for it then, so he did the only thing his brain knew how to do. He lashed out. He slammed his hand on the table and stormed out of the room, leaving Sarah terrified and confused. In that moment of quiet after the storm, sitting alone in his car, a new thought began to surface in David's mind. The medication helped him with focus. The therapy helped him with organization. But nothing had ever helped him with this. This was something different, something deeper, something that felt like a core part of him was broken, not just a part of his attention span. He started to wonder, what if the ADHD wasn't the whole story? What if the constant anger, the emotional volatility, the deep-seated sense of shame and fear wasn't just a symptom of a neurodevelopmental condition, but a silent echo of a childhood he had never truly processed? This was the beginning of his journey toward uncovering the hidden connection. He realized that the story of his ADHD and the story of his childhood trauma were not two separate threads. They were woven together into a single, complex, and challenging fabric. But if medication and behavioral techniques are only part of the answer, what is the whole picture? What does true healing look like when you have to address both the neurological differences of ADHD and the deep, silent wounds of trauma? In our final part, we will explore a new path toward healing, a path that is both compassionate and transformative. The answer lies in a different kind of healing, one that recognizes the intricate connection between mind, body, and past experience. It's an approach called trauma-informed care. This isn't about ignoring the symptoms of ADHD. It's about approaching them with a new lens, asking not just what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. It's an understanding that a child who struggled to focus in school might have been struggling to feel safe. A person who lashes out in anger might be responding not to the present moment, but to a past threat. The goal of this approach is not to simply manage the behavior, but to heal the nervous system that is driving it. The healing journey for someone with this double burden often begins in a new kind of therapeutic space. It starts with finding a therapist who is not just trained in ADHD, but also in trauma-informed therapy. This is a therapist who understands that a dysregulated nervous system needs to be regulated before any cognitive work can be done. They might use approaches like somatic experiencing, which focuses on helping the body release the trauma it has stored, rather than just talking about it. Or they might use eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR, which helps the brain reprocess traumatic memories so they no longer hold the same emotional charge. These are not quick fixes. This is deep, compassionate, and often difficult work. But it is the work that gets to the root of the issue, addressing the hidden story that medication alone can't touch. Another powerful tool in this healing journey is mindfulness. For someone with both ADH and trauma, the mind is often a chaotic place, either jumping from one thing to the next or being hijacked by the echoes of the past. Mindfulness is the practice of gently bringing your attention back to the present moment, without judgment. This isn't just a focus exercise for the ADHD brain. It's a profound act of emotional regulation for the trauma brain. It teaches a person to observe their feelings, the anger, the anxiety, the fear, without being consumed by them. It is a slow, patient process of creating a safe space within your own mind, a place you can retreat to when your nervous system starts to feel overwhelmed. And perhaps most importantly, healing from this double burden requires the slow, deliberate work of building safe relationships. A trauma-informed brain has learned that relationships are a source of danger, of unpredictability, and of pain. It is wired for a defensive stance. The most powerful corrective emotional experience for this brain is a healthy, stable relationship. It's a relationship where you are seen, where your emotional responses are met with patience and understanding, not judgment. It's a relationship where a moment of conflict is not a sign of the end, but a chance for repair and deeper connection. This could be a friendship, a romantic partnership, or even a therapeutic alliance. These relationships are the anchors that help the nervous system learn, finally, that it is safe to relax. This is the path David eventually found. After that moment of clarity in his car, he began searching for a different kind of help. He found a therapist who listened to his story, all of it. She didn't just hear the symptoms of ADHD, she heard the instability of his childhood. Over many months, she helped David begin to untangle the threads. She helped him understand that the rage he felt wasn't just impulsive, it was a profound trauma response, a deep-seated protection mechanism from a time when he had no control. She helped him give a name to his feelings, to understand that the shame he felt wasn't his to carry. She guided him through exercises that helped his body release the years of tension it had been holding on to, teaching him to find moments of quiet safety in his own skin. David's journey wasn't easy. There were days when he felt like it was too much, when the anger and the sadness felt overwhelming. But slowly, with the support of his therapist and the patience of his girlfriend, Sarah, he began to make progress. He learned to pause before lashing out, to say, "I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. I need a minute," instead of exploding. He learned to trust that Sarah's love for him was stable and predictable, and with every act of patience and every moment of understanding from her, his trauma-informed brain began to learn a new story. He began to see that his ADHD was a part of him, a part he could manage with the right tools. But he also began to see that his trauma was not his fault, and it was a wound he could finally heal. Ultimately, the story of ADHD and childhood trauma is a story of hope. It is a story that tells us that a diagnosis is not a life sentence. It is a starting point, an invitation to a deeper understanding of ourselves. It is an understanding that our struggles are not always what they seem on the surface. That the restless mind, the impulsive action, and the volatile emotions may not be flaws, but echoes of a survival story we never consciously knew we were living. The healing, then, is about more than just managing symptoms. It's about a profound act of self-compassion. It's about giving ourselves permission to address the whole story, the genetic wiring and the emotional wounds. It's about building a life that is not just about coping, but about thriving. Because when we finally untangle the threads of our past and our present, what we find is not a broken person, but a whole and resilient human being, capable of finding peace, building deep connections, and living with a profound sense of purpose. And that is a journey well worth taking.